Story 1. I have not. He gave off arrogant vibes in the late 1980s and they never changed. He was dishonest then in business, wages, and relationships, and he is worse now. He has been correct on several matters. He does what he wants and faces no consequences. Story 2. Many years ago, down on the Gulf Coast, I attended a meeting of local businessmen who had come to hear him speak. This was before he entered politics. That day, he painted glamorous pictures of magnificent buildings, casinos, and shopping malls he intended to build along that section of the coast. He spoke about how much money everyone was going to make, and I watched in amazement as the group sat with their mouths open and dollar signs in their eyes, believing every word he said. He really stacked it high that afternoon so those men couldn't see over the top of it. I thought to myself, these are grown, educated, successful businessmen, yet they seemed mesmerized by him, like a cobra responding to its handler. They could not see what seemed painfully obvious. This was a con man, a master of deceit, as clear to me as a mountain lake on a summer day. Afterwards, he drove back to the airport, boarded his private plane, and left, never to be heard from again. Nothing he promised that day ever came to pass, and nothing he has done since has changed my opinion of him. I wake up every day in disbelief that we were stupid enough to put this huckster in the White House. Not once, but twice. Now, the sickness with which he is afflicted, spreading like a contagion, threatens to become fatal for this nation. The irony is that we have been complicit in its spread. If we began tomorrow dealing with the harm he has caused, we could never erase the shame of having let it happen, and I do not know if we could fix it. Story 3. When I read his comments about grabbing women and how attractive his daughter was, I knew he was a slimeball. How women could vote for him after that is beyond me. I would not be comfortable having him in the same room as any female members of my family. Story 4. It was 2017, the day he was inaugurated. I voted against him, but I said I was going to give him a chance. Then he lied about the size of his audience. My opinion changed 15 seconds after he became the president. Story 5. In the mid-1990s, he betrayed a family construction business for work we had completed on one of his properties. Story 6. When he said grab them by the private parts and his base just did not care, that is when I realized how cult-like this situation had become. Story 7. In 2016, I was a registered Republican and had voted for Republican candidates in previous elections. I thought Donald Trump would be a great candidate until the grab them by the pussy comment, which he did not recant. He continued with inflammatory comments, but I still gave him a pass. Finally, when he said, I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters while campaigning, I thought, this person does not represent me. This proved true throughout his first presidency. I have increasingly voted for Democratic candidates since 2016. Story 8. I always thought he was gross and weird, even when he was a television host. But I was one of those people who said, maybe it won't be that bad, when he was first elected. I am Jewish and grew up near Charlottesville. When the riots happened, several of my friends and family members were attacked by neo-Nazis in their hometown. When the President of the United States got on national television and called the neo-Nazis who attacked my friends very fine people, I just about lost my mind. Story 9. In the 1980s, when he tried to buy the Buffalo Bills and the National Football League said no way this dishonest person gets into our league, they had good reason. So he got the New Jersey Generals in the United States Football League and Herschel Walker. He acted like a big shot, desperate for attention. Then the league folded and he just would not go away. Always the narcissist seeking attention. Story 10. In 2015, I gave him a chance when he first entered the running and said he wanted to drain the swamp, only to realize during the debates that he was completely dishonest. I did not know much about Donald Trump until then. Story 11. As a carpenter, when I heard his company would do everything it could to cheat other tradesmen out of what they were owed for the work they performed for said company back in 2015. Story 12. Back when the man monetized the public firing of game show contestants on low-quality reality television. Before that time, I was not aware the man existed due to my age and the region in which I lived. However, weekly, I watched a television show with themes of abuse, humiliation, belittlement, and backstabbing in a workplace environment. Someone involved in that nonsense had to be untrustworthy. Story 13. I gave up on him when he called military veterans losers and suckers. What a terrible thing to say. I am an Army veteran. Story 14. I never liked him, but when he mocked a disabled person, he proved what a despicable person he truly is. Story 15. I was never a supporter, and I thought he was a blowhard and buffoon, but I also thought he was largely harmless and that he would stamp around for a while, then go away. He is not harmless, not by a long shot. Story 16. He was accused of sexual assault in the 1980s. That is when I formed my opinion of him. It has not changed since. He is the worst. Story 17. I have never changed my mind about him. I am a New Yorker who has watched him in the spotlight since the 1980s, and it was instant loathing. My instincts were right. I could see him for what he is immediately. Story 18. When he started using Adolf Hitler's rhetoric in his rallies in 2016, I thought he was a clown. Now I see him as a fascist. Story 19. Trump has never given me any reason to change my mind. I read his book The Art of the Deal when I was about 14 and thought it was self-congratulatory, narcissistic drivel written at about a third-grade level. He is an obvious con man and has never contributed anything of value to this country. He is also demonstrably incompetent in almost every endeavor he has undertaken. As is often the case, his bigotry and anti-intellectualism are features of his substandard cognitive ability. If you had told me how unintelligent our electorate would become when I was 14, and that we would elect this utter buffoon to be our president, with full knowledge that he intended to implement Project 2025, I would have dismissed it out of hand and called you a crank. It is shameful and pathetic that we have allowed it to come to this. Story 20. Me, age single digit. Who is that rich guy in Home Alone 2? Me, age 20s. Working at Staples when they got, "You're fired," Donald Trump figurines, which we promoted, stocked at the front door. No thanks. Me, age 30s. Who is this person demanding a black president's birth certificate? Oh, that guy? Forget his racist behavior. I have disapproved of his racist and sexist behavior ever since. Story 21. I never changed my mind about Donald Trump. He is a psychotic narcissist, child rapist, and becomes more dangerous the more power he acquires. Story 22. I grew up hearing about him in the tabloids, exploiting union people, and generally behaving like low-class trash while growing up in New York. I have always found him annoying at the least. Story 23. His first 3 years in office, I thought he was misunderstood. It was his last year during the COVID-19 pandemic when I realized he was unreliable, especially when he suggested putting disinfectant into people's blood to eliminate the virus. Story 24. I have yet to change my opinion of him. He was a dishonest person from day one, and I will never understand how everyone did not see that. Story 25. When he testified that Native Americans are not real Indians if they have dark skin in the 1990s, he was upset that the Pequot were building a casino. Some of them also have African ancestry. To him, they were black, not Native. Why is it acceptable if Native Americans have white ancestry? He has also been the lowest of the low in terms of class, intelligence, and morality. Story 26. America watched him incite an insurrection and responded by rewarding him with another term. That was when I knew there was no coming back and no point fighting for anything in this idiotic wasteland anymore. Story 27. He went from a punchline to an existential threat to democracy during the 2016 Grand Old Party Convention. Dark, Orwellian content. Story 28. Never have. I thought he was an asshole when he was tooling around trying to get on the news in New York in the 1960s. Story 29. These past few months, it seems he is working for Americans. His ideas include no federal taxes, no tax on overtime, going after pharmaceutical companies to give Americans the best prices others get, and addressing tariffs to ensure we get our share and are not ripped off by other countries, to name a few. Whether these things happen or not, I do not doubt he is trying to make them happen for the benefit of the American people. Dogecoin is another example. Again, I am not sure what will happen, but I am totally fine with someone investigating and seeing what Washington career politicians, on both sides of the aisle, have been doing with our tax dollars. He still carries on like a child, but his energy and passion surpass Joe Biden. He seems to be doing more in 7 months than any burst of activity I ever saw from Joe over 4 years. This is Reddit, so I expect to be criticized for giving the man some consideration based on what I can tell so far. And that is okay. I do not care what Reddit thinks. Story 30. In the early 2000s, I always thought he was a sharp and smart guy who was just unpleasant, like Simon Cowell or Gordon Ramsay, who have both actually become much more pleasant. Now that all this focus is on him, I cannot believe how much of a complete fool he is. It can be confusing with the daily purposeful deceit, but sometimes he is earnest, and in those moments, he shines through as blatantly unintelligent. Story 31. Why would anyone change their mind about Donald Trump? He has always been a selfish, cruel, incompetent person who has only done whatever he thinks helps him the most, regardless of others. He has never genuinely loved anyone and is incapable of it. He is corrupt and arrogant. If you have never liked this type of person, you would not have liked Donald Trump in the first place, and you certainly would not be changing your mind about him now. If, on the other hand, you like cruel, hateful, spiteful, and foolish people, then you most likely are one yourself and you would like Donald Trump. Nothing he has done would change your mind about that. No one is changing their mind about Donald Trump, and anyone who says they are is not telling the truth. Story 32. The 2016 election was the first time I could vote. I was learning about politics more during my senior year. When he said he wasn't a politician but was still running for president, I thought, then why are you? How will you? I knew we were in trouble. Story 33. He was unpleasant in the 1980s and 1990s. I did not find him at all appealing. His false claims about President Barack Obama's birthplace reminded me he existed in the 2010s. Now we know he is an evil, thin-skinned pedophile. There was no exact moment for me, just a long, slow reveal. I will be glad when he is finally out of my life. Story 34. I used to think he was just a foolish person until I realized he was also extremely cruel, around the time I learned what kind of harmful laws and policies he was implementing to oppress people. He went from saying we need to build a wall to expressing hostility toward immigrants, non-white people, LGBTQ children, women's rights, the middle and lower classes, and others, while also refusing to release important files related to Epstein. Story 35. After the assassination attempt, I saw him more favorably. I never adored the guy, though. After the Epstein situation, it went back to normal. Story 36. I knew he switched political party affiliation, and when he ran against Hillary Clinton, I found it interesting that many pictures of them existed. Not a lot, but they were clearly in some of the same circles. While I would never vote for him, that made me question whether he sincerely thought he could help Americans or if he just wanted to enrich his family and boost his ego. The exact moment I knew he was evil was when my Indian roommate panicked the night he got elected. He moved to Toronto a few months later. Story 37. I never really changed my mind about him. Before he got so involved in politics, he was just a joke of a businessman with a show and was known for saying, "You're fired." He was not someone that anybody really liked or respected, and was sometimes parroted. I never liked him but had no reason to hate him. When he announced he was running for president, that was also a joke. People did not think he would go very far, and certainly did not think he would get elected. Then the world as we know it came crumbling down. He had been campaigning on being an unfeeling person, so he revealed his true colors and showed that not only had he never been a good person, he also was not about to change that. Story 38. At first, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and thought he just needed to relax and think before he spoke, especially if he did not want anything he said to be taken out of context. But after he lost the 2020 elections and encouraged his followers to storm Capitol Hill, I realized he is an immature man-child having a power trip. Story 39. I have never changed my mind. He was the lowest person on The Apprentice and has only gotten worse. As I said in another post, which was reported to ban me but was overturned. I hope he gets cancer and dies quickly. Story 40. When I went to Atlantic City in the early 1990s and saw the empty casinos, my uncle explained the situation. Before that, I thought he was a genius money manager. Story 41. When it became clear that the Biden administration had abandoned defending lifelong democratic ideals like freedom of speech and transacting, along with the actions of Elizabeth Warren and Operation Checkpoint 2.0, my mind did not change. I still did not vote for Donald Trump, but I suddenly realized that the choices were so poor that Donald Trump was going to win, and it was obvious this time. Story 42. Hey, I never had a big place in my life. I remember him from the tabloids in the early 2000s. When he came down the golden escalator in 2015, I brushed him off like many people and thought it was a big joke. Once he secured the nomination after Brexit, I found a renewed interest in politics because it was clear something was happening in the world, and I wanted to understand what and why. Story 43. Always kind of supported him, even more so after the assassination attempt. Then the Build Back Better plan happened, increasing the debt after campaigning to lower it and having Elon Musk spend so much time finding cuts. Then the Epstein files. I might vote Democratic for the first time since 2008, depending on if the Democrats choose a centrist candidate or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez-lite. Story 44. When Stephen Colbert interviewed him 9 or 10 years ago, Donald Trump did not respond to every question because he knew it would incriminate himself. If you watch his path to the White House, he started out as an independent, failed, but learned from it and continues to learn from the people around him. He continued to learn with each failure and worked the system. That does not mean I like him. Story 45. I am hard right. I despise the political left. I abandoned Donald Trump and Make America Great Again after he closed the Epstein case and asked, "You are still talking about Epstein? I hate the political left. I hate Donald Trump. I am politically homeless." Story 46. I have hated him since I first saw him in that terrible show of his. His whole "you are fired" shtick never sat right with me. Like anyone should be taking career advice from someone who managed to bankrupt 3 casinos. I never realized there were people who actually took him seriously as a business person until recently. He is a vile person, and nothing I have learned about him will ever change my mind. Story 47. I didn't know much about him other than he owned a lot of property and was the host of a reality television show. I thought he was a good businessman before his first term. Then, when he ran for office, I started hearing about how he mistreated people to force them out of their homes in order to buy the buildings they lived in, and was immediately made aware of how unethical he is. After that, all the other information about him made him seem worse and worse until I could no longer consider him a human being, just a lump of flesh driven by greed and instinct. Story 48. I did not think anything about him. I never watched The Apprentice. When he got involved in politics, I thought he was an idiot. But now that he has been in office twice, I have changed to thinking he is a complete idiot. Story 49. I found his behavior hilarious until he won this second time. We need to get him out of here. The tariffs are really affecting me. Story 50. 2011 documentary entitled, You've Been Trumped. Before that, I thought he was just a wealthy, unpleasant person, but after that, I realized he was actually a terrible individual. Story 51. Do you mean when he went from being a boorish, dull reality host that I barely knew or cared about to being a dangerous fascist? His first campaign. Story 52. Always was a slimeball. Every incident is another nail in the coffin. The problem is the coffin is the size of America. Story 53. I am not from the United States and saw him as comic relief most of the time. However, a point was made that during his first term as President of the United States, unlike all the presidents before him, he did not start any war. I took that as something positive. When he started to run for the job again, I really thought it would be better this time, that his good relationships with Russia would help find a diplomatic compromise and end the entire conflict for good. But obviously, that idea did not age well. Story 54. January 6th and everything that followed. I was 16, and even I knew that was not someone I would ever vote for, despite being very right-leaning. I stuck to my convictions, hated his actions, voted for Nikki Haley in the primary and Kamala Harris in the election. Story 55. I didn't vote for him the first time. I thought he was full of nonsense on the campaign trail and would never attempt to do the things he had campaigned on. Turned out I was wrong. Within a few months, it was obvious he really was going to try to do what he said he would. It wasn't just talk. Story 56. I went from not thinking about him at all, that rich guy who was in Home Alone 2, to realizing in 2015 that he talks about Muslims the way Adolf Hitler talked about Jews. Story 57. Wait, someone had to change their mind? I could see as a child in the early 1980s that he was a low-rent grifter. Story 58. When I discovered that the news media was telling lies on both sides just to boost their own desire for fame, I realized they took the world on a roller coaster of falsehoods for their own benefit, not for the world. It was then that I decided to think for myself. If anyone says Donald Trump did this, did that, or did not do something, I go straight to the source to find what he said or did. I do this with everyone. I was absolutely shocked when I found out that most news reports pertaining to Donald Trump, whether good or bad, have headlines that say one thing, but when you read the article, it has nothing to do with the headline and usually ends with some commentator who said they predicted what he would do, and the news media ran it as truth. I think for myself now, and it has served me well. Story 59. To the men out there, he has proved that he is the most macho man to be president. He has no fear to throw preteen girls down in South Africa. Story 60. I've always thought he was a fool. Now that he has been in the forefront of the news and media for the past decade, I think he is the biggest fool in the United States. Story 61. During the aid effort in Puerto Rico after the hurricane, he went there to help distribute supplies. He stood at a press table and started throwing rolls of paper towels like he was giving away t-shirts to a crowd of concertgoers. I thought, this guy thinks this is about him and he is trying to look cool and generous, but he just looks like a huge tool. It went downhill from there. Story 62. In 1989, he called for the death penalty for the Central Park Five. They were all innocent. Donald Trump has been accused of racism and pedophilia. Story 63. Well, I go back and forth on him, but the biggest moment I had was around 2018. I was chatting with some folks. I knew one. I asked, "Who are we putting up for president? Why does it matter?" A guy said. I replied, "It matters." He went on about how, regardless of who it is, if I didn't vote for them, I was misogynistic, racist, Nazi. My jaw dropped. What? Then 3 of them joined in. I left. Something was deeply wrong here. I just asked a question and it turned into that. So I started searching for what made Donald Trump a racist. The narrative hadn't been developed. I couldn't find anything significant. I found 10 reasons. Number 1 on the list was that he disrespected LeBron James by dissing him and saying, "I like Mike." That made no sense. I don't recall the insult, but it wasn't racially charged. So the next day, I told my friend what happened. She, a lovely Democrat, said, "Funny you mention that." She was at a dinner party and the topic came up. They couldn't think of anything. A little before this, Brett Weinstein got canceled. I was a fan, a very forward progressive professor at Evergreen College. These 2 things started a lot of questions for me. Then COVID-19. My team was calling Donald Trump racist, so my wife and I got Chinese food. Well, then he got a lot of flack about not doing anything. I just began to see that we are being lied to. He's not the answer, but nonetheless, I felt we were being lied to. COVID-19 from a wet market made much less sense to me than the COVID-19 lab in Wuhan. Then my friend had a friend in Wuhan, I think. She sent her a video in fall of 2020 when we were masking. Her friend was at a nightclub. No mask. So I don't know that he's the answer at all, but the whole thing shifted my thinking. Due to the media saying Russia, 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 and clear evidence and all that, none was ever shown. Now Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton appear to be behind it. The thing about Team Trump that makes me think is Tulsi Gabbard. That's who I was for in 2020. When she got labeled a Russian asset, I was like, what? By Hillary Clinton, not some Reddit post. So the 2020 strategy looked like any opposing voice was labeled Nazi, racist, and every word no one wants to be and called Russian assets. I now want to be independent. I hope that answers your question. Story 64. My opinion has never changed. I never liked him and never will. I grew up in the 1980s and saw right through him even as a child. Story 65. Probably the late 1980s when he started becoming a recognizable name. It did not take many interviews to see his arrogance and self-serving nature. He was just an awful person. Story 66. I have not changed my mind. I voted for him not for who he is, but because I trusted that he would do exactly what he is doing. Story 67. News story about a man suing an elderly woman for her quarter-acre of property because he wanted to build a casino on it. This happened in the mid-1990s. I thought he was a terrible person then and always will. Story 68. Never changed. He has been the biggest jerk to me since the late 1980s. It only gets worse as time goes on. Story 69. My mindset has not really changed about Donald Trump, but more about America. It went from being a beacon of technological discovery, science, and opportunity to an absolute shambles that I do not want to go anywhere near. This was around the time he was elected the first time, but became cemented when the coronavirus disease struck and everyone turned on each other. Rome has fallen. Story 70. I am not sure anyone has ever changed their mind about him. From the start, he represented the worst of humanity. If you are fundamentally evil, you support Donald Trump. If you are a good human being, then you are against Donald Trump. There is no middle ground. Only evil people support Donald Trump. Story 71. Knew he was a fascist. Did not think Republicans were so eager to debase themselves for him. Was directionally correct but off on the magnitude by a lot. Story 72. I hated him from the start. That hatred has only deepened in depth and complexity. He is thoroughly and irredeemably disgusting person. Story 73. I have never liked him. His voice, face, and hair creep me out. He has always been an imperialist in the way he speaks. I guess you could say I changed from dislike to intense hatred. Story 74. He has always been a trust fund fraternity boy with zero morality. If you did not realize this until recently, then I have a million bridges to sell to you. Story 75. There is one episode in Criminal Intent where they talk about him. I did not like the way they described him. Later, it was the way he acts on television. I do not live in the United States. Story 76. I am 46 years old. Early in my life, I had no strong opinion about him. I would visit my family in New Jersey, and he was often on the New York television channels or appearing in World Wrestling Entertainment. Then he had a public feud with Rosie O'Donnell over some jokes she made about him, and I thought, this person is really petty and immature. My opinion of him declined from that point onward. Story 77. When he first became famous in the 1980s and 1990s, all I could keep thinking was, who is funding this man when he cannot even run businesses successfully? Story 78. I have changed my mind a few times. Initially, I thought, that is the man from Home Alone and The Apprentice, which I have never watched. He is a wealthy man. When he first appeared on the primary debate stage, I thought, that man is an idiot. When he won the election, I did not change my mind. When he lost the next election and tried to lead an overthrow of the United States government, I thought, this man is a dangerous caged animal and an idiot. When he won the election the second time, I thought, this man is a dangerous animal who has been unleashed into a den of bunnies and guinea pigs, and an idiot. Story 79. In 1989, he took out advertisements in New York City newspapers calling for 5 black youths, who were wrongfully accused, to be executed. Story 80. I have always had a fairly negative opinion of him even before the politics. However, I have generally held a negative opinion of politicians in general. Story 81. When I was a child in the 1980s, it was well known that he was a charlatan and a womanizer. Not much has changed, just many other terrible people supporting him. Story 82. I thought he was a self-centered jackass who lucked into the presidency. It turns out his strategy to rely on machine learning proved the power of artificial intelligence marketing and has now developed into a full AI power grab and public surveillance. He is not self-serving. He serves the billionaire class. He has been systematically turning the government over to the artificial intelligence overlords. This is not about him at all. The exact moment was when all the technology business executives handed him millions of dollars for his inauguration. Story 83. When he walked into the beauty pageant dressing room, I had never heard of him before. At that time, my opinion was that he was a terrible person. My opinion remains the same. Story 84. During the first season of The Apprentice, I realized he had no idea what he was doing and was a massive misogynist. Before then, I was neutral. I had never really thought much of him beyond the general idea that he was a businessman who would occasionally appear on television. I never knew much about him. After that, my opinion was exclusively negative. Story 85. I was never a fan. He has always struck me as a pompous blowhard, and I hate arrogant people. I didn't know the slightest thing about him, and when I heard he was running for president the first time, I burst out laughing, thinking he couldn't be serious. Of course, he was, so for a split second, I entertained the thought and wondered where he stood on the issues. Maybe going away from a career politician could be a good thing. I went to search online and was very quickly absolutely horrified. I changed my mind once I actually understood who he was as a person, and that judgment has sadly been proven correct over and over. He's about as awful as it gets. That's the story of how an internet stranger contemplated supporting him for about 30 seconds. Story 86. In the early 1990s, when he was in the news for being a complete failure at business, my conservative father declared him a charlatan. I am not sure what happened to make people allow him to become president. Story 87. I never really remember thinking anything good about the man but started disliking him after he ruined the United States Football League by being his typical arrogant and uninformed self. He destroyed the opportunity to have good football all year round. He has never changed, and I still think he is very foolish. Story 88. I am a generational Democrat. 3 things changed my mind. First, the Olympics showing biological men competing against women. Second, the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I was shocked that the Democrats would treat a United States president that way. I honestly felt that if they could do that to our president, what would they do to Americans? Third, the assassination attempt on President Trump. He was literally shot, and instead of running, he raised a fist for America and said, "Fight, fight, fight." He would not leave the stage until he retrieved his shoe. I am not trying to change anyone's opinion. I am only giving my reason, along with 76 million others' opinions. He took a bullet to make America great again. Story 89. When I saw this feckless windbag on The Apprentice, I said, how is this possible? This person and their children don't have a clue how their businesses run. How is this individual rich? Then I looked into it a bit and realized that they were being supported with false information in bankruptcy after bankruptcy, something that has persisted to this day. It is all show business. We are just on the latest season, and it turns out it is the last season of Game of Thrones. Story 90. When the Democratic Party selected Kamala Harris after sidelining Joe Biden, Donald Trump had my vote. I wish the Democratic Party had done a better job. Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania would have won easily. Story 91. I saw through his fake behavior back in the 1980s when he would appear on television being obnoxious about his wealth. I hated him even more when he took out that heinous Central Park 5 ad, and I have continued to think he was nothing but a pure personification of the 7 deadly sins in bloated, ugly, pompous form ever since. It would be hard to conceive of someone who exemplifies the worst of what a human being can be, and I cannot believe there are otherwise decent people who cannot see it. Story 92. 2020 election. I never heard of him outside of Home Alone 2 until he started doing politics. Sorry, I am Generation Z, born in 2001. I had no idea about his past. Story 93. No. His book, The Art of the Deal, was out when I was a kid, and I skimmed it a few years later. There is no changing my mind because I was right about his character from the beginning. He is a contemptible person. Story 94. Once he bankrupted a casino, I knew everything I needed to know about him. His reality television show was entertaining, but he always seemed shady and creepy. Story 95. I was unsure at first but left immediately after hearing, "Grab them by the private parts." It has been downhill since then. Story 96. It is concerning that he went bankrupt 6 times and cheated contractors out of payment. Yet some describe him as a stellar businessman. Both statements cannot be true. Story 97. I have not changed my mind. I have disliked him since the first time I saw him in my mother-in-law's tabloids. He reminded me of my creepy, pervy, mean uncle, and I hated my creepy, pervy, mean uncle. Story 98. I never liked Donald Trump. The very idea of a reality television star with zero governing experience being picked as the grand old party candidate always seemed insane to me. He has done much worse damage to our country than I could have imagined. Who knew so many Americans wanted to live under a corporatist pseudo-monarchy and would vote in favor of attempting to turn themselves into serfs? Story 99. A better question would be, what was the exact moment you changed your mind about the United States government? Bush, seeing how he stumbled terribly in his words, actions, and promises, made me lose complete faith in the United States government. What is even worse is that after 25 years, we are still being heavily deceived. I can imagine how Cheney must be giggling with joy about Trump. Story 100. During his first campaign, when he made fun of people with special needs, that was probably the point when I said that I hoped Hillary Clinton would win. I do not doubt that she might be involved in something shady, but at least it would be normal politics. Story 101. I always knew who he was. I used to listen to him when he was on the Howard Stern show, and if you followed any celebrity news, you knew who he was. The thing is, I don't think his supporters ever knew who he was before now. Well, they still don't know who he is because they don't want to. I used to think he was a rich, cheating, chauvinistic person. Now I think he's dangerous. Story 102. I do not know about changing my mind, since I never intended to vote for him. At first, I thought he was an amusing sideshow that we could all laugh about on the way to the real election. Then I started noticing friends and family supporting Donald Trump and became really concerned. Story 103. Sometime during the second season of his Apprentice television show, he showed that he was not worried or concerned about himself. Story 104. I have never liked him. I remember someone I knew complained about him in the 1980s and 1990s. He has always been overly impressed with himself. Story 105. I never changed my mind about him. Would you like to see pictures of me standing in the street outside Trump Tower in 2016 on Election Day? My grandmother went to Atlantic City often from Brooklyn, and she used to speak negatively about this unpleasant person constantly in the 1990s. Story 106. I always found him obnoxious. The moment he blamed the birth conspiracy on Hillary was when I realized, oh, he is truly a shameless liar. Story 107. I learned about him from television commercials promoting the Grand Hyatt Hotel when I was in high school in the early 1980s. He seemed like a con man even then. With all of his negative and scandalous publicity regarding his marriages, legal cases, business failures, and other affairs, he has never seemed like an honest man in my opinion. Story 108. I had a very brief period of time after he declared his candidacy when I said, it might be good to have a successful businessman in the White House for a change. Run the government like a business. I think the first thing he did that turned me against him was when I saw him mocking a disabled person. Shortly after that, I learned why running the government like a business is a very bad idea. Story 109. I have never changed my mind about him. It was obvious from the beginning in the 1980s or 1990s that he was not a good person. Story 110. Just some New York State real estate salesman who sounds like a drag queen. It is funny that right-wingers fell for this trick. Story 111. As with most people years ago, I am now convinced that the biggest threats are those who helped get him in the second time, from funders and policy experts, voters, and probably others behind the scenes. Story 112. I actually liked The Apprentice show during the first couple of seasons. Then, in one of the episodes, maybe 2006, Donald Trump walks onto the scene with the 8 apprentices to evaluate their performance. They played the sounds of heraldry, trumpets, as the camera zoomed in on Trump's face. It was clear that this man wanted to be a king. At the time, I thought that would never be possible. The whole birther nonsense turned me further against him, and pretty much every event since then even more. Story 113. Ever since he became a leader of the United States of America, he was already messing things up. Before, his reputation was not that bad at all when he was serving in his first term. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.